Welcome to Game Fondue Reviews. In this video we're going to take a look at Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a role selection game in which players assume the role of colonial governors of Puerto Rico. Let's jump right in with the description of the rules, see a few example turns being played, then I'll be back for some closing remarks. This is Puerto Rico set up for a 4-player game. Depending on the player count, the setup's going to vary quite a bit. We're just going to go into what varies and not the specifics of how it varies. In all cases, each player is going to take a player board. You're going to choose a player to go first who takes the governor tile. That player is going to take an indigo and put it in their area here. And then everybody else, depending on the player count, is going to take a different plantation. In 4 players, the second player takes indigo and the third and fourth each take corn. At this time, you're also going to give each player a number of doubloons, again, based on player count. In a 4-player game, it's 3 doubloons each, but you're going to notice these 2 players with corn each start with 2 doubloons, and that's because in the very popular balanced game variant, anybody that starts with corn starts with 1 doubloon less. Next, as long as you're playing with more than 2 players, you're going to put all the quarries face up. In a 2-player game, you're actually going to remove 3. Then you're going to shuffle all the plantation tiles and deal out 1 more face up than the number of players. So we're 4 players, so we've dealt 5 face up. Also in a 2-player game, you will remove 3 of each type of plantation from this deck. You also need to lay out a certain number of VP chips based on the number of players. We're 4 players, which happens to be 100 VP chips. So those have been counted out and put here. The roles that will be used in the game also vary slightly based on player count. We have here the correct roles for the 4-player game. Next, you will place as many colonists on the colonist ship as there are players. So you can see here we have 4 players, so there's 4 in the ship. Then you're going to need to count out a specific number based on player count. For 4 players, it's going to be 75 more in this pile here. And the last thing that varies based on player count is which cargo ships you're going to use. In a 4-player game, we use 3 cargo ships, one with 5 spaces, 6, and 7. So those are laid out here. In all cases, you're always going to have the trading house, and you're going to include all the goods laid out where everybody can reach them. Except in a 2-player game, you will remove 2 of each type of good. Aside from that, you're just going to put all the buildings in the indicated spaces in the center of the board. I do want to point out in the balance game, there's 2 changes. One is everybody who starts with corn gets 1 doubloon less, and the cost of the factory and the university are switched. So the university will actually cost 7, and the factory would cost 8. But you can choose what you want to do there. In a 2-player game, you're only going to include 1 of each violet building and 2 of each production building here. But any more players, you're going to include all the buildings, as you can see here. The game is played in rounds where players will take turns selecting these roles, and then everybody's going to perform the action indicated on that role. The game ends at the end of a round when there's not enough colonists to refill the colonist ship. One player fills all 12 spaces in their city here, or you're totally out of VP chips. Each round of the game begins with the governor selecting one of these roles, and then all players have an opportunity to take the action indicated on that role. But the person who selected the role, in this case the governor, will get an extra benefit. After the governor's done, the next player in clockwise order will select one of the remaining roles, and again they will get a special benefit for selecting it, and so on until all players have selected a role. At that point, any of the unselected roles will get a doubloon put on them, so anybody who takes that role in the future will get an extra money for doing so. At that point, as long as the game isn't over, the governor will just pass 1 space to the left and another round will begin just like that one. So at this time, we're going to go over each of the roles and what they do. The first role is the settler, and the settler allows everybody to take a new plantation. Beginning with the player who selected the role and then going clockwise, everybody's going to get to select from one of these face-up plantations here. The benefit given to the person who selected the settler is they can, instead of taking one of the face-up plantations, take a quarry. Nobody else can take a quarry unless they have some buildings that allow them to do so. But when you take one of these, you're just going to put it on any available space face-up on the bottom part of your board. After all players have chosen a tile in clockwise order, any remaining tiles are just discarded from the game, but if these piles ever run out, the discards will be reshuffled to form new face-up stacks. The next possible role is the mayor, and players are going to get new colonists when the mayor is selected. The way they're going to do that is beginning with the player who selected the mayor. Players are going to take turns taking 1 colonist off the colonist ship and putting it into their play area. Also, the benefit of the person who chose the mayor is they get to take 1 free colonist out from the colonist pool at this time. After players have taken all the colonists off the colonist ship, they may then freely reorganize all of their colonists, even colonists they took in earlier rounds in the game, to different circles available on their board. Right now you can see the only circles are in the indigos and corn, but all these buildings and other plantations you get will have empty circles on them. If you have more colonists than you do circles, you can put the rest in San Juan here, but you must put colonists on any available empty circles if you can. At the end of the mayor phase, you're going to refill the colonist ship based on the number of empty circles in the top part of each player's board. The bottom part with the plantations doesn't matter, but for instance, if this guy over here had all these and they were empty, that would be 5 empty circles counted. So you would refill the colonist ship to 5 at that time. However, the minimum is the number of players, so if there's only 2 or 3 empty circles, we're still going to refill to 4 because we are a 4-player game. I also want to point out that all these buildings have an ability, but that ability does not activate. It cannot be used by the player who owns it until they have a colonist on it. So right now this small warehouse, for instance, does nothing. But once it has a colonist on it, it now applies this effect to its owner at all times. One other thing important to note here is if the colonist ship ever cannot be refilled based on the number of empty circles at the top, because all the colonists are gone, the game will end at the end of that round. The next rule we're going to talk about is the builder, and when a player chooses the builder, they're going to get opportunity to build first, and all their players in clockwise order will get an opportunity to build as well. The player who chose the builder can pay 1 money less. The cost of building any of these buildings is this amount in money. However, remember, if you're playing the balanced game, the university will actually cost 7 and the factory will cost 8. But point being, you're going to pay that cost to the bank, and you're going to put this on any available spaces on your board. These big ones that cost 10 actually take up 2 spaces, and you can't hang things over, so in the event that you already had 11 of these 12 spaces filled, you would not be able to buy this as the 12th one. It's also important to note each player can only build one of each of these types of buildings during the game. So for instance, a player that already has a construction hut could not build another one. And again, remember, your cost is reduced by 1 if you selected the builder. The cost of all players, however, even the players that didn't pick the role at this time, can be reduced further by the number of occupied quarries they have. You can see based on columns here how much of a discount you could have. So if this guy had these 2 quarries here, and these were both occupied, meaning they have colonists in them, he could reduce the cost of anything in this row by 1, because that's the maximum amount of quarries you picture here. But this row, he could reduce the cost of anything by 2 additional. So if he had these 2 quarries and he was the one who picked the role, he could pay 3 less for something in this row, for instance, because they will stack. The most you can ever get off for quarries is 4, and that would be this column here. And if quarry is not occupied, you do not get the bonus. So for instance, this could only be a discount of 1, even though he has 2 quarries, because they're not both occupied. The only other thing to point out there is the game does end at the end of a round when a player fills their board by building their 12th building. After that is the Craftsman, which is going to allow players to produce goods in clockwise order. During a player's turn, they're going to produce as many goods as they can, and the goods produce slightly differently based on type. Corn, you're going to produce as many as you have occupied corn plantations. So for instance, this guy here would produce 2 corn. If you only had one of these occupied, he would only produce 1 corn. And you can only produce as long as there's goods available in the supply. If there's not, unfortunately, you will not be able to produce them. But for all other goods, you're going to need both an occupied plantation and the corresponding occupied plant at the top. So for instance, this guy over here, if he had an occupied indigo plantation, he would not produce any indigo. But now that he has an occupied plant and an occupied indigo, he would produce 1 indigo. This same situation here, he would still only produce 1 indigo because his plant is powered for 2, but he only has 1 plantation. If he added the other plantation and he covered the circle with a colonist, he would now be able to produce 2 indigo because he has 2 occupied plantations and 2 occupied plant spaces. So that's how production of all goods works. Whoever chose the role of craftsman after everybody's produced their goods can produce 1 additional good of a type that they can produce from their area. So if he could produce indigo, for instance, and corn, he can't just decide to take a sugar as his free one. He'd have to take an indigo or a corn at that time. The next role is the trader, and the trader allows players to sell goods 1 at a time in clockwise order to the trading house, which is located here. So when you're selling one of your goods to the trading house, you're just going to take one of your goods, you're going to put it on the trading house and take the indicated number of doubloons. You can see corn is worth 0, indigo 1, and so on and so forth. There are some rules when selling to the trading house, however, and one is that you can only sell a different type of good. So for instance, if corn and indigo were already sold here, you cannot sell another corn or indigo at that time. You'd have to sell sugar, tobacco, or coffee. The other restriction of the trading house is that it can only hold 4 goods. It can only have goods in these 4 spaces here. So if somebody picks the trading house and the first 2 people were to sell in this particular situation, the next 2 players would not have an opportunity to sell because the trading house is filled. If the trading house is filled after everybody's had a chance to sell, then it will get wiped out. So it would not be wiped out if there was only 3 in here, for instance. It's only wiped out if it's totally filled at that time. The benefit of the person who chose the trader is they get to take 1 additional money when they sell a good. Also, I want to point out doubloons are totally public in this game. You have to share the amount of doubloons you have with other players and keep them visible to them. After that, we have the captain, and the captain is the only mandatory action in the game. Any other action you can choose not to partake in, but if you can partake in the captain, you must. Players are going to take turns, beginning with the player who picked it, shipping 1 type of goods onto one of these cargo ships here. And for each good shipped this way, the player who ships it is going to gain 1 VP chip. So the way this works is if you have some goods when it's your turn during the captain phase, because this is going to continue going around the table until no more actions can be taken, because remember, this is totally mandatory, but let's pretend this guy had these goods here. He can choose one of them, he's going to select a ship, and he's going to put all of those goods in that ship and gain the VP. So for instance, he's going to have to put all of his corn. He can't just put one corn as long as there's space for more, and he's going to take 4 VP because it's 1 for each thing he's put there. And then the next guy in clockwise order is going to go and it's going to continue going around until there's no more actions that you can take. But there are some limitations here. Each cargo ship can only hold one type of good. So even though there's still one space left here, somebody couldn't ship an indigo or a sugar, for instance. They'd have to put a corn here. Also, the ships can never be overfilled. So if somebody had 2 corn here later, they could only put 1 because this ship can only hold 5. Another limitation is if a ship holds a certain type of good, you cannot ship that good to another ship. So for instance, let's pretend this was totally full of corn and this guy over here had some corn. Even though he'd like to ship this corn because he'd get 3 points, this ship already holds corn, so he cannot ship it to a different ship. Each ship must hold a unique resource. The last thing to keep in mind is you must load as many of a resource as you possibly can. So that means, for instance, if this guy had 8 tobacco, even though there's 2 options, he could use this ship or this ship, he'd have to load in the ship with 7 because he can. So that's more tobacco he could load than if he put them in the 6. So he would fill up that ship. And the only benefit of the person who selected this role is they're going to get to take 1 extra VP when they ship. Not each time they ship, just 1 extra VP total, as long as they ship at least 1 good. I also want to point out, unlike doubloons, VP can be kept secret, so you're going to keep your VP secret from the other players. But the game does end the end of a round when all the VP chips are taken. So after all the goods that can be shipped are shipped, players are allowed to store 1 leftover good on their board. Not 1 type of good, 1 leftover good. So for instance, if this guy had 2 sugar and an indigo, he could pick 1 of them to keep in his area. He might keep this sugar, for instance, and the rest of these would be returned to the supply. Also, at this time, any filled ships would be emptied and their goods would be put back in the supply. But again, if the ship is not filled, it's going to remain like that. So for instance, we had the ship with 4 corn in it, that would stay with 4 corn in it because there's 1 extra space there that was left empty. With that, we move to the last action, and that's Prospector, and it's the simplest action in the game. There is no action. So whoever takes the Prospector gets the bonus of taking 1 doubloon from the bank. No other player gets to do anything. So after each player in a round has had a turn to select 1 roll, we're going to return all the rolls to the center, and all the rolls that were not selected get a doubloon on them. These can stack. 1 roll could have theoretically 3, 4 doubloon on it. Later in the game, if anybody picks a roll with a doubloon on it, they're going to immediately take those doubloon and perform the roll as normal. Also, the governor tile is going to pass 1 space clockwise, and the other round is going to proceed just like this. If, however, the colonist ship could not be refilled, somebody filled all 12 spaces on their board, or all the VP chips are gone, the game is over and the points will be tallied at this time. The way you tally points is you add up all the value of your VP chips plus the value of your VP in buildings. You can see the red number in the upper corner. It indicates how much VP each building is worth. So these are 4 and these down here are 1. And then also these buildings are worth special bonus VP as long as they're occupied. Remember, you do not get the effective in building unless it's occupied. So if you have this in your area and it's occupied, you're going to get some bonus VP for its effect. But a building does not have to be occupied to have this value. So again, you're going to add up your VP chips, value of your buildings, plus any of the bonuses you have from this group here, and whoever has the most points wins. Let's get going with this example playthrough. We know this guy's going to go first because he has the governor card, so he can pick any of these rolls at this time. He decides he just wants to start off with the builder. So first he's going to have the opportunity to build, then everybody else. But remember, he pays 1 less because he's the one who actually picked the builder. So he decides to spend all of his money. He's going to buy the hospice. Now normally the hospice would cost 4, but since he picked the builder, he pays 1 less, so he paid 3. He's just going to put that in his area. But remember, it doesn't do anything yet because it's not occupied. This guy decides to spend just 1 money, and he's going to pick up a small market at a cost of 1. This guy decides he'll also take a small market at a cost of 1, while this guy's going to spend both of his dollars to get a hacienda at a cost of 2. So now everybody's had an opportunity to build. This guy's turn is done, so this guy's going to pick one of the remaining rolls. He cannot pick builder. He decides to go with settler, so he's just going to grab settler. Now he can pick any of these. But remember, since he picked settler, his bonus is that he could grab a quarry if he wanted to, and that's what he's going to do. So then this guy can pick. He's going to take a corn. This guy over here is going to take an indigo, and this guy will grab a tobacco. Now any of these that are left over, not the quarries, are wiped out, and you're going to reveal 5 new ones, and it's 5 because we're a 4-player game and it's always 1 more than the number of players. So with that, it moves on to this guy's turn. He decides he's going to pick the mayor, and because he picked the mayor, the first thing he gets to do is he gets to grab one of the colonists from the supply, and then he'll be the first to pick off the colonist ship. So then this guy will pick off the colonist ship, and this guy, and this guy. And note that if there were more colonists on the colonist ship, we would continue picking in clockwise order, so players can get more than 1 at this time. Now everybody can freely reorganize their colonists, put them wherever they want. This guy goes with the quarry.
This guy's going to go with the hospice, this guy on corn, and this guy's going to put both of his on corn. Now at this time we count up the number of empty circles everybody has in their building area, not in their plantation area. So we see 1, 2, 3 empty circles. So 3 is less than the number of players we have. The number of players we have is 4, so the minimum refill of the colonist ship is 4. So that's what we're going to do at this time. And then lastly it moves on to this guy's turn, and he decides he's just going to pick the Craftsman. So now everybody that can produce will produce in clockwise order. We know he produces 1 corn because you don't need a plant to make corn. So he's going to take that 1 corn. This guy can't produce because he just has unoccupied indigo and tobacco. But even if they were occupied, he still needs a plant occupied up at the top. This guy nothing. This guy makes 2 corn. And now because this player picked Craftsman, he can produce 1 more good of a type he can make. He can only make corn, so he's going to grab 1 more from the supply. And with that, all of these are going to get a doubloon on them because nobody picked them, and all the rest of these will be returned to the area here so they can be picked again this next round. Aside from that, Governor passes 1 space clockwise, and we're going to play another round just like this one, but we're going to jump ahead a little bit later in the game so you can see some more interesting situations. Welcome back. We've progressed quite a bit in the game. You can see the colonist ship now has way more than 4 on it because there was a whole lot of empty circles up top. Remember, the empty circles at the bottom don't count. But anyway, it's this guy's turn because he's the governor now, so he's going to go ahead and pick captain. So he has both indigo and corn. Remember, captain's totally mandatory. He's going to put the 2 corn here in the smallest available ship. He immediately gets 3 points for that. Normally you'd get 2, but if you pick the captain, your first shipment is worth 1 extra point. So now this guy has indigo, sugar, and corn. He has to decide what to do with it. He decides to go ahead and ship all this corn here for 3 points. But now this ship is totally filled, so nobody else is going to be able to ship corn. So this guy up here decides he has to ship his indigo because there's no way he could ship this corn, and he's going to put the indigo in this size ship here. So that's 1 point for him for doing so. And this guy decides he's going to go ahead and ship his tobacco at this time for 3 points, and this is the only ship available for the tobacco, so he picks up those points there. Next we come back around. This guy's got to ship these 2 indigo because there's a space for them to do that, and he's going to pick up 2 more points. So we're going to switch him out for a 5. Remember, points are secret. 1 more indigo here is a point. And you'll note he'll never be able to ship the sugar because all 3 ships have different types of goods in him. This guy can't ship, so he's out. This guy here is going to ship 1 more indigo for 1 more point. And then back to here, this guy's out. This guy can't ship. Nobody else is going to be able to ship at this time. And you can only keep 1 good. So this guy's okay. He keeps this 1 good. This guy's okay. He keeps this 1 good. But this guy's going to have to discard 1 of these back to the supply. Now all the full ships are going to wipe out. So this is actually going to remain with 1 seat open, and this is going to have a few open there. And we're going to move on to the next guy's turn. He decides to take the trader, and he's going to go ahead and sell this. Now, sugar's always worth 2, so he picks up 2 money plus 1 for picking the trader, so he gains 3 money by doing that. Now this guy over here can decide if he wants to sell this corn or not. The corn itself is worth 0 money, but he decides he's going to go ahead and do it so that this guy cannot. So he gets 0 money for selling that. Now this guy can't sell his corn because there's already a corn in the trading house. So that ends the trader phase. We're going to jump ahead to the end of the game so you can see the final situation. Welcome back. So near the end of the game, this player just selected mayor, and that's significant because we know the colonist ship is not going to refill. So first he's going to get his free 1 and then 1 off the ship. Then everybody else in clockwise order is going to take theirs. And you note that this is not always even. Some people will get more colonists than others, and that's good reason to select mayor like you saw here. Now everybody's going to reorganize these, but we know that this is going to refill to at least 4 because there's 4 players and there's only 1 left. So after everybody gets a turn this round, the game is over. It doesn't end immediately, but it will end shortly, and we'll jump back at that time to calculate the final scores. The game's over. We're just going to do the score for this guy's board. So the first thing we look at is his VP chips, which we now reveal. We can see he's got 5, 6, 7, 8 points in VP. Those are just counted directly, and then he gets just the points per building. There are these red numbers here. Now he doesn't get any bonus for this one because it's not occupied, but then he does get the bonus for this one because it's occupied, which is 1 victory point for every 3 colonists. So he just adds a point for every 3 colonists he has, and then the other players are going to total their scores as well. Whoever has the most points is going to be the winner.
Puerto Rico is one of my least favorite games to set up because depending on the number of players, there's a different amount of everything that supplies, but the gameplay itself is very solid. It's surprisingly easy to teach because for the most part, if a player understands the roles, they understand understand the game, and none of the rules are that complicated, so it's very easy to get new players into it. There's a sort of debate where people say that if Puerto Rico came out today, it wouldn't have the impact and be as highly regarded as it is, but I strongly disagree with that because I find the game to be incredibly streamlined and easy to play and a lot of fun. There's definitely strategic depth to it, and it's very replayable, and there's lots of different buildings with different powers. I do recommend, though, that if you're playing Puerto Rico for the first time, or if you've played it before, that you do use that balance game variant, because there's only two very slight changes. That is, if somebody starts with corn, they have 1 money less, and the factory and the university are switched in cost, because it does make the game more fair. Also, I didn't really talk about it in the video, but there is a 2-player variant where you use the same rules as in a 4-player game, and each player is going to pick 3 during a turn, alternating. That makes for a fantastic game, so I strongly recommend it with the 2-player count as well. Also, if you've never tried it before, there's a beautiful implementation on Board Game Arena that would be very easy for you to check out at any time at your leisure. So I strongly recommend you do that. If it looked neat to you, that's Puerto Rico.